Well, the Big D is back with a UFC 286. We're going to London this weekend, so before I bring in my UFC friend, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. A lot of content, football free agency, yesterday, UFC, Lord knows what's going to come up next, but check it all out. Please check out the Big D podcast for all your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So I'm back with a UFC 286 preview. Boy, it seems like 3 days ago we were talking about UFC 285. Billy Ward joining us. Billy, uh, Usman Edwards 3 this weekend in the UK. Are you ready for this trilogy?
Yeah, I guess. This isn't. We've had some really good pay-per-views, some really good cards, even free cards lately. This one, for being a pay-per-view, feels a little underwhelming. Not because I'm not intrigued to see what happens with the trilogy between these two, but they haven't really been the most exciting fights for the most part. It was kind of a slower paced fight, Usman more or less dominating until the big head kick in the fifth round. So it's not like this is one that's going to be a barn burner. We're expecting fireworks the whole way. I actually expect Usman to fight very conservatively here, just try to win the rounds, try to survive, because he is the better fighter, right? He's the better all around fighter. He just needs to avoid those big shots. So, moderately excited, but they're pushing it a little bit with all these pay per views.
Yeah, maybe too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing because this is already what the fourth pay-per-view and it's the middle of March.
Yeah, it feels like one too many. They used to always do the two title fights per pay per view. This one and the next one are both one title fight pay per views, and they both have decent co main events. We've got Fiziev versus Gaethje for this one, and then it's Gilbert Burns Masvidal on the next one, which is more fun than it is interesting because Burns is going to be a ginormous favorite. But yeah, it seems like we probably could have combined 286 and 287, had Usman and Izzy on the same card, couple of rematches, it all would have made sense. But they're trying to get every dollar out of the fan base that they can.
Yeah, if you think back to when Usman and Edwards last fought, I just pulled it up this morning, and I mean, first off, I think the altitude played a big effect on Leon Edwards and a few of us thought, but other than the first round, Usman dominated the fight. He took Edwards to the ground, and it seemed like Edwards could do nothing but just watch the champ. And then fifth round, a head kick from I don't know where, Big Ben or somewhere, the English Channel, and Edwards knocked out Usman.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the altitude. Like, obviously, both fighters are fighting in the same place, but Usman trains in Denver, so you wouldn't think it would have been as big of an impact on him. But maybe he was more tired. He was working harder. It's a lot harder to take someone down and keep him down than it is to lie on your back with a guy on top of you. So, like, maybe Usman was working harder, was a little bit more tired. Maybe we'll have a little bit more left in the tank in the fourth and fifth rounds of this one. I don't know. It will be interesting too, of course, because now we're going to England, where Edwards gets to defend the belt on home turf. I don't know how much of a factor that is. Usman's probably been there for a couple weeks, so it shouldn't be a huge deal. But yeah, a lot of interesting factors at play here. The betting lines have moved a good bit towards Edwards compared to the last one. Usman was, I think, like close to minus 400 or so coming into the last fight. Only minus 245, minus 250. Kind of feels like a good deal on Usman here. One of those, and especially for DFS, he's under 9,000 for the first time in basically forever. So it does feel like, unless you think that head kick is a repeatable thing that Edwards can pull out again, it does feel like we're getting some value on Usman in all terms of speculation here.
Yeah, I agree because usually, especially with Usman, he's been so consistent, and I don't know what it is, but like all the UFC champs who've been champs forever have lost recently. I mean, Amanda Nunes lost, but then regained her belt. Valentina Shevchenko lost. Adesanya lost to Pereira, and then Usman lost in Salt Lake. So it seems like the UFC may be going through a transition, but I don't expect Usman to be down for long. And maybe it was just Leon Edwards' one shiny night or one
Yeah,
shiny moment.
I think that's probably more likely, and I do think you're right in terms of there's kind of a shift here. Some of these guys into their guys and girls in Shevchenko's case, they're getting up in their mid-30s. They're not quite as sharp as they once were. They're not quite as hungry. I just don't think Edwards is the guy we're going to see hold the belt for 2, 3, 4 years the way we've seen past champions. Welterweight has a lot of intriguing prospects coming up. We just saw Shavkat fight Shavkat Rakhmonov a couple weeks ago. He'd probably be a favorite over Edwards right now. If Hamzat can ever get his stuff together and actually make 170, get back in the cage, I don't know what's going on with him. He'd probably be a favorite over Edwards. Even Gilbert Burns, who we're seeing fight Masvidal on the next pay-per-view, that's probably a pretty close one. He's a couple years younger. It does feel like Edwards just got the right matchup at the right time, was able to survive the ground and then land the shot. The interesting thing for me here is I don't know if we're going to see Usman go a little bit harder to finish Edwards on the ground this time, just to avoid that. Or flip side, he's just going to play it even safer just to make sure he doesn't get knocked out at the end. My guess would be B. He's a very safe, calculated fighter. Very reminiscent of GSP at the tail end of his career, where he's not really trying to dominate people. He's trying to do enough to win and keep his belt, or in this case, regain his belt. But that'll be the intriguing thing. For DFS, play both of them. Like, we only got the one title fight. Usman scored, you reminded me of this, 98 points in his loss against Edwards last time. So even when he loses, he puts up huge DFS scores. He just has such a high work rate. There's no getting away from him. I believe the last time they fought, even for tournaments, you needed both the guys to win tournaments. So you can certainly play them both together. Definitely going to play them both together in cash, and probably go with Usman in most of your tournament lineups, because even when he loses, still a pretty good score.
Obviously, in this fight, we know Usman's such a great wrestler. We know he's going to look to take down Edwards, and we know Edwards would try and keep this fight on the feet and try and more or less contain, or maybe try and hit Usman with some big shots, particularly those leg kicks. Because thinking of leg kicks, Edwards did hit Usman with a couple decent leg kicks before the head kick late in the 5th round. So one guy's going to look to take it down. The other guy wants a standing fight. So, Lord, I don't think Usman would want one leg kick potential, one dangerous leg kick from Edwards. If that means we get 25 minutes of a boring, crappy fight, so what? If you're Usman.
Yeah, and Usman's not going to try to take him down. Usman's going to take him down. Whether he keeps him there and what he does with it on the ground is the bigger question. And we've seen a lot of fighters who are coming from striking backgrounds or other things. They've learned that it's a lot easier to get back up and to survive the ground than it is to stop the takedown in the first place. And that's what Edwards did with Usman. He did a good job when they were on the ground. He was never really in danger of being finished. He was never really in danger of being tapped out. So I think we'll see more of that. It's just a matter of what Usman can do with those takedowns, whether he can rack up a lot of control time and stay safe, or again, does he play it a little bit more aggressively, knowing how dangerous Edwards is, and then it might make more sense to just try to get him out of there rather than just hang on for 25 minutes.
If you're Edwards, I think in this fight you want this standing as much as possible, right? Because if Usman keeps taking it down, it's the old excuse me. It's the here we go again. But I think if you're Edwards, you'd rather this fight on the feet than, because it's not going to be a question of whether Usman takes you down. It's whether he grounds and pounds you, which is something I think he could have done more in the last fight.
Yeah, obviously Edwards wants it standing up, but we're kind of glossing over that Edwards is necessarily a way better striker. Like, do we even know that that's true? Looking at their entire careers,
I'm not sure if that's true, because Usman can finish there too.
Right. So that's what makes it tricky. It's not like he's clearly better on the feet. He's probably a little bit better. Certainly, has more finishes that way, but I don't know. So yeah, it feels like everyone's overreacting a little bit towards, a fluky 10-second exchange in their last fight. Because we've seen him fight 2 times. Usman's largely dominated the prior 8 rounds before that minute. It doesn't seem like we should expect anything too different this time, but you never know. He's a little bit older. coming back from his first ever knockout, that can sometimes mess with people. But my money's going to be on Usman. I'm going to have a lot of him in DFS. And yeah, like him at the odds and the price.
Yeah, you told me we get Usman in the 200s instead of plus 350, plus 400. Sign me up.
Mm-hmm.
So, unlike some pay-per-views we've seen, there's only one championship fight, but the co-main is still intriguing between, let me see, Rafael Fiziev. Why do I always get the Russian guys? And Justin Gaethje?
Yeah, these are two intriguing lightweights. This is an interesting one. You talked about, earlier a little bit of a changing of the guard with champions. I think we're starting to see it in lightweight because for the last few years, we've had the older crop of exciting money fighters kind of at the top, but not quite champions. In Poirier, Gaethje, Chandler, those type of guys. And now we're starting to see the Fizievs of the world. Benny Dariush is fighting Charles Oliveira coming up. Some of these younger, fresh fighters. And lightweight is just so crazy deep. Like in any other division, these two would be fighting for a title shot. But we know the next title shot's probably going to either Oliveira or Dariush, unless Volkanovski gets a rematch at 155. So this one's really intriguing in terms of rankings. Also, I said I'm not that excited for the actual fight between Usman and Edwards. Polar opposite in this one. Gaethje just comes out and brawls. Great leg kicks. Other than that, he's just trying to take your head off. Fiziev he was the striking coach at Tiger Muay Thai for a long time. Some of the best Muay Thai in the world. Crazy highlight knockouts, spinning wheel kicks and all kinds of crazy stuff. This one should be a brawl back and forth. Two guys just swinging leather at each other. All kinds of exciting strikes and flashy attacks. Also, very excited to see how this plays out. Can Fiziev take that step clearly into the top 5, put himself in the title picture? If he beats Gaethje, he certainly does. And Fiziev's a fairly strong favorite here. He's about the same odds as Usman for what it's worth.
I mean, it feels like to me that Gaethje's been a little bit, I wouldn't say bad luck, but it seems like he fights all these great fighters at the worst possible time. Like he fought Khabib, he fought Oliveira. Like he always seems to get the tough end of the draw, right? And now he's got this of one of these young hot shots.
I mean, to a degree. So he got Khabib's last fight, which Khabib obviously went out in his prime, which is pretty rare. But before that, he fought Donald Cerrone and Tony Ferguson, both who were kind of on the aging side. So I hear you. But that's only been recent memory. So he fought Khabib for the title, lost, beat Michael Chandler in a total brawl. That was a fun fight. Clearly beat Michael Chandler. Another older guy, though, right? This was not prime Michael Chandler. And then lost to Charles Oliveira. And what was also an awesome fight. Gaethje tagged him a few times, followed him down. We don't need to get into all that one. But I hear you based on the last couple. But, he's had his easier fights in the past. This is a good one. This is what the Gaethjes and Chandlers and Poirier should be doing. They should be testing themselves against these young up-and-comers instead of just trying to fight each other over and over. We've got Gamrot, Sarakian, Dariush, Fiziev, and I could keep going from there. So this will be an interesting one. Like, can Gaethje hold on for the slightly older guys for another couple years, or is it time to start making some other big names at lightweight? And, for what it's worth, I don't think I'm going to bet Fiziev at his odds just because this is a huge step up in competition for him. He beat Rafael Dos Anjos, another older guy, Brad Riddell before that. Cool, but, not super tough fights. And, the price point's a little bit tough for him on DFS and in terms of gambling.
Yeah, when I saw those odds, I'm like, give me Gaethje all the way because he's fought the top guy. He's fought the top guys, and it's different when you're like sneaking, when you're like under the radar. Now Fitz is taking a big step up against Gaethje, who's fought against some of the best 155 pounders.
Yeah, and from a DFS standpoint, Fiziev is very exciting, but doesn't grapple at all. And we know you either need quick knockouts or takedowns to put up a big score. He's only topped 100 points once, and he's got more than one knockout. It's just hard to rack up enough points with striking to justify his 8,800 salary when you've got Usman at 8,900, who, Usman in his one loss has scored more points than all but one of Fiziev's wins. So, like, it's really hard to justify that salary, especially if things get tight on a deep card like this.
Agree. And I don't think Gaethje's a bad play at 7,400 either, right? If you want to get me, I don't know if it's contrarian value, but I think Gaethje could win a decision here too.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a similar problem with Gaethje. From a cash standpoint, I agree with you. He's a little bit tough for tournaments because he's also not going to grapple. I really don't see him knocking out Fiziev. Like you said, he could win a decision. That's not necessarily ideal for GPPs. But of course, when you get a 7,400 winner, you're not going to complain if he gets 70 or 80 points instead of 120. So I hear you. I doubt I'll be getting to either guy that much in GPPs just because the styles don't lead to a ton of points. But for cash, yeah, I'm with you.
Speaking of catch, how do you who do you think is the one fighter outside the championship and co-main event fights you're looking to get? Because I'm think if I'm looking at you, I'm reading your mind. I think there's a certain fighter you definitely want in this on this card.
Who's that? Let me know because I'm not all that confident in anyone yet.
Mohammed Mok wait,
Okayev?
Mohammed Mokayev.
Yeah, obviously he checks all the boxes of what we're looking for, right? He's world-class grappler, so he racks up a ton of points. He's averaging over 120 points per fight. He's fighting a UFC debutant, Brazilian guy. Usually that means good grappling, but they're kind of willing to accept the takedowns and play off their back. Mokayev has 18 takedowns in 3 fights. Didn't even get any in his first fight because he locked up, or he got a knockdown and a guillotine right away. So obviously a great play. 9,700 is a lot though. Like if you're gonna play him, you got to hope that some of the other big favorites don't come anywhere near his score because that puts you behind the 8 ball. For cash, he's certainly the cheapest fighter or the safest fighter. So I get that. I actually really like Jake Hadley at 9,300. He hasn't looked great, but Malcolm Gordon's a good matchup for him. There's some other expensive fighters, probably not going with Juju Miller at 94. But on the women's side, Casey O'Neill at 8,500 feels pretty cheap because she's actually averaged more points than Mokayev. She's topped 100 4 straight fights, or top 110 in each of those. Pretty aggressive, gets takedowns, can get knockouts as well. I think she's probably the best points per dollar option here.
Yeah, I was thinking the Casey O'Neill because look at her card. She's racking up points. And as we saw last week with the can't think of the $8,300 fighter who was basically a must play in catch.
Well, that was because there's a short notice thing that made it a little different, whatever. But this is also one of those where I try to think like the matchmakers or think like the UFC. O'Neill is from Scotland, right? So from the UK. She's fighting 34-year-old Jennifer Maia, who's been around a while, never really did anything super noteworthy. She fought Shevchenko, but that went how you expect. Won 2 of her last 5 against lower level competition. This fight is to make Casey O'Neill look good. This fight is to try to get people to know who Casey O'Neill is and build her up in the flyweight rankings, right? Like that's why they're doing this fight. I'm surprised that her line is as close as it's going to be. It's already started to move a little bit. She was minus 180 yesterday on FanDuel, now minus 192, for example. I think it'll continue to go that way. So, come Friday when I'm writing my article, when she's minus 215, minus 220, that 8,500 will feel like a steal.
Because you think 85 when I think she could be a bigger favorite than that, depending on how much money the Brits have put in. Because I think she could be in the mid 220s and 8,500. That is a steal.
Yeah, if it goes that way, of course. And that's what's interesting about MMA is the betting lines are not nearly as efficient as they are with something like basketball or football. Where if you see an NFL team favored by 6 or 7, that's usually probably pretty darn close. There's surprises, but that's the likeliest outcome. MMA, we're taking a lot of guesses here. We don't have the sample size. Fighters get better and worse at a much faster rate than, athletes in team sports who play 80 sometimes a year or 16 or whatever. So it's just a different game. But she's 25, 9-0 as a pro, has won 4 straight. This fight is to make her look good, right? So we have to think about why they would do that. Similar idea with Mokayev, except Mokayev costs 1,200 more, or if you're betting on him, he's minus 800 instead of minus 180. which makes it a little bit tougher.
Okay, so with this fight taking place in the UK, I just wanted to hear from you, Billy. Who are some of your favorite MMA UFC fighters from the UK?
All time, and you might
Yes.
not know this reference, Dylan, but do you know who Lee Murray is or was?
Not off the top of my head.
He is most famous for orchestrating the biggest bank heist in England history and then escaping to Morocco for a little while before he got extradited back. But he was a killer. Like he was just destroying people, just tough street kid from there. Also famous for a brawl with Tito Ortiz outside of a nightclub where he knocked out Ortiz and some of his friends. Fought Anderson Silva at one point in Cage Warriors. I think he made it to the UFC for like one fight, so I'm cheating a little bit here. But he was kind of like a proto Anderson Silva type, like very good striking, big strong dude. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. Yeah, he's probably my top one. I was a big Paul Craig fan. I know that's not England specifically, but UK. Feel like we've kind of seen the best of Paul Craig, but just a weird guy. Like he came out super intense and got in your face, and then he pulled guard, but then he would break your arm off and try to beat you with it. So it was a weird mixture of things. Really liked him. That's just coming off the top of my head. How about you?
I can remember Michael the Count Bisping because he wouldn't shut up.
Bisbing, like I like Bisbing well enough. I actually love him as a commentator. I think he does a really good job. Just never the most exciting fighter, in my opinion.
Because it seemed like all his fights went to decision except when Mr. Knockout Artist KO'd him at UFC 100.
Yeah, and he was a striker without huge power, which is not ideal, obviously. But I mean, we got a ton of up and coming Brits these days. Like that's why they keep going back there. But you can see in the card, there's one in almost every fight. Or not necessarily British, but UK. You got Jai Herbert, Jojo Wood, Jay Cadley, two guys both named Chris Duncan.
Oh
Separate.
gosh. Oh no.
There's Christian Duncan from England and Chris Duncan from, I believe, Scotland. So, they got a lot of talent. Sam Patterson making his debuts on Contender Series last year. Jack Shore, the Welsh guy. Casey O'Neill, we talked about. Gunnar Nelson. That's the fight before the co-main. Actually, a really fun fight. Gunnar Nelson's been around a while. He's only fought once in like 3 years. Really, really high level grappler. He beat Jeff Monson in a grappling match when he was like 20. And he's a welterweight. If people don't know, Jeff Monson is a huge man. He's like 280 pounds. So this, 20-year-old welterweight beat him at one point. He's fighting Brian Barberina. Barberina, not the most skilled fighter, but like has never been in a boring fight in his life. So that should be a fun one.
Yeah, don't forget the guy I really wish could be at this fight, but Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah, I'm not a big Patty guy. I think he's not as skilled as he is hyped, if that makes sense.
You're saying he's a less boring Conor McGregor, maybe?
I wouldn't quite say because Conor McGregor was legitimately one of the best fighters in the world for a time, and his celebrity has outlived his ability in McGregor's case. But Pimblett, he lost to Jared Gordon. I know what it says on Tapology, but he lost to Jared Gordon. He's not, probably ever going to be a champion. We just talked about how crowded lightweight is. Imagine Paddy Pimblett fighting Rafael Fiziev, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Beneil Dariush, Charles Oliveira, like the list goes on. He'd get smoked by any of those guys, right? So it's more hype and entertainment value than it is we really think this guy's one of the best.
All right, before we conclude, I do want to talk about how DraftKings has come out with Rainmakers, where if you play DFS like either like we do, I mean, last year DK came out with NFL Rainmakers codes, which ended up being a big hit because you could get like all these codes to win big giant amounts of money. But the DK has come out with Rainmakers codes where you can get a whole bunch of codes based on events or an event. So, Billy, could you explain the success or maybe lack of success you've had with Rainmakers?
Yeah, I've done pretty well in it. I kind of lucked into it they started it last year as kind of like a beta test thing, and you could buy packs for specific events. And I bought one pack for an event. A pack gets you a full lineup, and I think I bought like one other card to swap somebody out. And the pack was $30, and I think I cashed for like 750. So I had 40 or 50 in, and that was kind of my Rainmaker's bankroll. But I'm going to try to give a somewhat succinct overview on how it works because it's weirdly complicated. But you get cards, just they're NFTs, right? So you get these NFTs of fighters. Some of them you can use all year. Some of them are used for a specific event only. Obviously, the ones you can use all year cost more. And the fun part for me is trying to time the market on some of those guys. So, like, I bought a Bo Nickel card well before his fight was announced. That went up. I could have made more money selling the card than I actually got out of the lineup I used it in. So it's a little bit like a stock market in that way, because you're trying to figure out not only who's going to get fights they can win, but who's going to get a lot of fights this year. So I think younger fighters, Mokaev, Bo Nickel, Raul Rosas is another one. These guys are going to try to stay pretty active versus, you buy a Henry Cejudo card, he's probably only going to fight the one time. Weirdly, looks like we're going to get 2 John Jones fights this year, but I wouldn't expect a third. Stuff like that, that cost benefit is one of the things. And then after that, it's just a DFS lineup. The only difference is it's 5 fighters with a captain instead of 6. So your captain gets 1.5 times the scoring, but if you own the card, any card can be your captain. A lot of good contests. I think it's a lot of fun. The packs usually sell out, so there's a drop today at noon if you want to get in on some. Just buying one pack gets you a full lineup. You can enter it in. Yeah, I think I'm skipping a lot of it. They also give out money on a weekly and monthly basis for whoever holds the most cards. There's like a leaderboard of how many cards you have and how much they're worth, and you get rewarded for that too. So that's a big part of trying to make a profit on it, is just keeping these cards so then you can get the payouts from DK when they do the snapshots. That probably didn't make any sense in that quick of a time frame because it's very hard to learn and it took me a couple months, but yeah, that's the gist of it.
Is it worth spending for a couple $100 and like getting Rainmaker's cards? Are you better off doing that for spending the money for DFS lineups?
It depends. I think if you're going to get into it, it's still somewhat early in the year. If you're going to spend at least a few hundred and get yourself on the leaderboard where you get payouts every week and every month, it's probably worth it. I wouldn't do it if you're just going to buy a couple just for an event, because if you don't win that event, those cards are useless, right? So if you're going to do it, I would buy, they call them the Genesis cards, and there's some other ones that can be used all year. Try to look into those. A lot of those, I made some money early in the year just looking at the farthest off pay-per-view that had fights announced and buying some favorites on those and then selling them for $5 or $10 more as we got closer to the fight and people were trying to build lineups. So you can actually make decent money on it without even ever really playing the contest. Just, you pull up, they got UFC, I don't know, 290 is probably the most recent one announced. And that's Jones versus Miocic. So those cards are already popular. But you'll see, they'll announce on the undercard of some pay-per-view that some, huge favorite is going to be minus 900 on the fight. Buy up a few of their cards. Just hold on to them for a couple months. Then the week of that fight, they'll go up 5, 10, $15. The Bo Nickel I was talking about before his fight was announced, I bought it for 55. They were selling for like 140, 150 the week of his fight. So if you're willing to do that and put in the work and track these fight announcements and buy up the big favorites early, could definitely still make money on it. But yeah.
I think it's just another way people can have fun and make a little dough because whether it's Rainmakers, DFS, sports betting, or best ball, people love to play, and if you get one of these and if one of your Rainmakers lineups hits, you sit pretty.
Yeah, and the big thing is there's no salary cap on the contest. It's just what cards you own. So you kind of have to be willing to commit enough money to buy, 5 favored cards. And that depends on the rarity tier. If you're doing a core contest, you can probably get out for 10 or $15 with all favorites. But, if you're not willing to really buy the cards you need or buy enough packs that you're likely to get one, it's probably not worth playing the contest. But again, it's like a stock market. You can make money just flipping the cards. And that's honestly been the more fun part of it for me, is trying to buy undervalued cards, see when they get a fight announced, and then see their price spike and resell. I've been doing that a lot more than I've been playing in the contest as of late.
All right, Billy, thanks for hopping on. We wish you well, and hopefully UFC 286 is profitable for your bets, cards, and one.
Oh no, got too many irons in the fire here, but it's fun. See you, Dylan. Thanks for having me.